It was April 18, 1942. The sky over the Pacific carried the hum of something new, a sound the Japanese had never heard before. 16 B-25 bombers, stripped down and modified for range, were roaring off the deck of the USS Hornet. These aircraft were never supposed to take off from an aircraft carrier. No one thought they could. But as the last one lifted into the air, the men below watched in silence. What they were seeing wasn't just a flight, it was a message. The Doolittle raid had begun. Tokyo had been untouchable. For months after Pearl Harbor, Japanese morale soared as city after city across Asia fell to their empire. America, they believed, was broken, too wounded to rise again. But what came from the east that morning shattered that illusion. The first explosion struck Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. Civilians ran into the streets, looking up at a sky filled with smoke. Japanese anti-aircraft gunners fired blindly, not believing American bombers could be over their homeland. It wasn't the size of the attack that stunned them. It was the realization that the Americans could reach them at all. Each explosion tore more than buildings apart. It tore through their confidence. For the first time since the war began, the Japanese public felt fear. And that fear reached the Emperor's War Council within hours. Across the Pacific, Jimmy Doolittle's crew fought a different battle, the clock. They were too low on fuel to make it to safety. Each man knew they'd have to crash land in China, or worse, bail out over enemy territory. Some were captured. Some died. But when word reached Washington that Tokyo had been bombed, a new energy surged through the American people. Newspapers called it payback for Pearl Harbor. Children in schools cheered. For a nation still mourning its dead, this single act reignited the will to fight. It was proof that America wasn't just striking back, it was only beginning. Yet in Japan, the shockwaves of the Doolittle raid went far deeper than fear. Military leaders, humiliated that their skies had been breached, swore revenge. Meetings inside the Imperial Navy headquarters turned heated. The attack exposed their weaknesses. Their radar coverage was poor, their early warning systems fragile, and their defensive confidence shattered. Admiral Yamamoto, who had once warned that Japan had only 6 months to win the war, realized the clock was ticking faster than anyone thought. He now knew that the Americans had not been crippled at Pearl Harbor. They had been provoked. And that realization led him to one of the most ambitious and fatal decisions of the war, to lure the U.S. fleet into a decisive battle at Midway. What began as a daring psychological strike by 16 bombers would end in a turning point that changed the course of history. Because the Doolittle raid didn't just show the Japanese what America could do, it revealed what America would become. The fight had only begun. Hours after the Doolittle raiders vanished into the stormy Pacific, Tokyo's sky still smoldered. Firefighters worked tirelessly, civilians wept in disbelief, and Japan's proud military machine began to sense something it had never faced before: vulnerability. The Japanese command had told its people the war would never touch their homeland. Yet the impossible had happened. 16 American bombers, launched from a carrier hundreds of miles away, had struck the heart of the empire. No one in Tokyo knew how they got there, but one truth spread like wildfire: America had reached them. In the halls of Japan's war ministry, officers stood silent as reports came in. Each message carried humiliation. Radar had failed. Defenses had faltered. The once invincible image of the Emperor's empire was burning under its own overconfidence. The Japanese press tried to hide the scale of the attack, but even the military couldn't silence what the people had seen with their own eyes: American bombs falling on their capital. That realization, more than the explosions themselves, forced Japan's leadership to confront a terrifying truth: this war would not be easy, and America was only beginning to fight. Across the Pacific, President Roosevelt stood before a nation that had been waiting for hope. The Doolittle raid was small in scale. It destroyed little compared to what Japan had inflicted. But its psychological power was immense. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, America had struck back. Newspapers filled with headlines like "Tokyo bombed" and "Doolittle strikes the rising sun." Families who had hung gold stars in their windows now felt pride instead of grief. Every image of those bombers became a symbol, proof that America could and would fight back harder than anyone imagined. But the raid's greatest impact wasn't seen in Tokyo or Washington. It was felt deep in the Pacific Ocean. Japan, shaken and desperate to restore its pride, made a fatal decision. They planned to draw out and destroy the U.S. Navy once and for all at a small atoll called Midway. They believed they could crush America's spirit again. But what they didn't realize was that Doolittle's raid had already changed everything. It had given American pilots confidence, it had galvanized U.S. industry, and it had inspired a generation of soldiers who now believed they could win. 2 months later, at Midway, Japan's gamble would meet its reckoning. The U.S. Navy, armed with intelligence, radar, and courage, would sink 4 Japanese carriers and turn the tide of the Pacific War. It was there, in those fiery waters, that the prophecy of Doolittle's raid came true. The Japanese learned that America's fight had only just begun. The raid had not just bombed cities, it had bombed Japan's illusion of control. From that moment forward, the empire of the rising sun began to set, one battle at a time.